Hi, everyone, and welcome back to LTC Heroes Live by Experience Care. Today, I am joined by Chris Hollister, the co founder and CEO of Pegasus Senior Living. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Victoria. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Um, Chris, we usually start the episode always with asking our guests how they started in long term care. And usually get so many different answers. So I'm excited to hear your story. How did you start working in long-term care, and what was it about this industry that made you want to stick around for the long run?
Well, thank you. I've been at it a long time. I started in 1986. I was a year out of business school. I really, in business school, was very interested in real estate and finance. I didn't walk the little ladies across the street being an Eagle Scout in high school or anything. I can't brag about that, but this industry has a way of pulling at your heartstrings once you get in it. And I just fell in love with the mission. I started in 1986 working for what was then VHA Development, became Greystone, who were moving from New York to Dallas and built continuing care retirement communities with hospitals, and went all over the country helping plan, doing market analysis, and more on the bond financing side, and just really learning how the economics of the business work. But once you start going into buildings, you see the mission and the joy of it. People think it's sad who aren't in it, and they miss the fact that there's a lot of joy in senior living.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you use the term mission, because this is LTC Heroes. And so when we talk about heroes in the industry, of course, it's because they take care of our seniors, and they have all that hero to them. But it's also because I've talked to a lot of people in this industry, and they all are attached to it in a way that, when people they need to retire, they don't want to retire because they still feel like they have, their mission to this sector. So it's really something specific to long-term care. Um, so I know you also have entrepreneurial experience in other sectors, correct? You have a business in ecotourism, I believe.
Yes, I do. Yes, in New Zealand.
Yeah. And so I think it will be, I mean, the differences between long-term care and ecotourism are, I think, clear for everyone. But I think it would be really interesting to know what are the similarities in the way you operate and run these two businesses.
Well, that's probably one of the unique questions you've ever had on your show, I would imagine.
Yeah.
As I said, I've been in senior living since 1986. That's certainly my primary mission in life. My primary entrepreneurial activities. Pegasus is my third entrepreneurial effort in senior living. But when I sold Southern Assist Living in 1995, I moved to New Zealand for a bunch of reasons. I could tell you over beer or a coffee, and really have always had a passion for nature, and went there and did a lot of backpacking and hiking, and met a guy who had been in travel industry, not specifically tourism, but he'd started a small travel company in New Zealand. And we cooked up this idea to buy a piece of what they call bush in New Zealand, a wild, very wild, pristine piece of land on an island off the coast of Auckland called Waiheke Island, which is sort of world famous in New Zealand, and developed zip lines. But we kind of trick people into thinking they're coming for an adventure activity when they're really going to learn about the bush. And we've had a rat baiting program and gotten rid of weeds, and the bird life has exploded. So the similarities, I would say, more than anything, is they're both, in a sense, life and death endeavors. That would be one similarity in the zip lining ecotourism. You don't want to drop anybody. We've had knock on wood, we've never had any serious injuries. We've had two, I'd say, consequential accidents, but no one was died or permanently injured, and knock on wood on that. But we had a safety guy who's one of the top guys in that field, who helped really build the zipline course for us. And his saying is, "I'm with the Department of Redundancy Department." Meaning, it's all about doing things right, double checking, and having the procedures. That's a similarity with risk
Yeah.
management in senior living. The other one is empowering your people, because they're both, I try to do things that are service oriented. I'm not smart enough technically to go do a techno company or be a Silicon Valley guy. but I've always felt I started the restaurant business when I was 16 years old, and I also have a pizza company that I've invested in New Zealand. I'm not the founder, but I'm the only investor. And my daughters kid me that, Dad, you're probably the only guy in the world in senior housing, ecotourism, and pizza. But
For
they're all
sure.
about making people happy and the customer side. I would say senior living is by far the hardest business. I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
moving parts, and the care side is a whole other level of complexity. It's gotten harder over the years. But the people side, empowering employees, for example, we don't have a canned speech. We have our guides. They are sending these people through the air on a thrilling experience. When they get down into the bush, they're really teaching people about the history of New Zealand and how the Maori, the original inhabitants, uh, used various things in the woods. We give them a quiver of arrows. We don't give them a canned speech. We
Mm.
empower them to read the room, read their specific audience, and spend as much a little time as they seem to want on what we tell them and where they stop and all that kind of thing. And I think that it's very analogous to senior living, because every senior living community is like its own human habitat. It has its own peculiarities. So you always have to gauge, prescriptive things that you have to do with giving people leeway to make it their own community.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So let's talk about Pegasus Senior Living. Tell us a little bit about you guys, who you are, what you do, and what you offer.
Well, thank you. So we were founded in 2018. Stephen Vick, my good friend and co-founder, we had both worked with Welltower, who's the largest REIT, as most of your listeners will know, in senior living. And I was on the Sunrise board. I'd been on that board for about 5 years, and Stephen and I ride bikes together. And he said, "Hey, Welltower called, wanted me to take over some buildings." So I said, "Well, I'll help you." Next thing you know, he asked me to be his partner. Um, I bought Stephen out. He had some health issues. He's better. Don't worry about him. Stephen's won a lifetime achievement award with in the industry. He's a great guy, and I just saw him in Colorado. But I bought him out in 2021. I'm the CEO now. And we took over 36 buildings for Welltower. We have a couple other we manage. These were all managed by Brookdale previously, and we're underperforming. And they needed capital expenditure improvements, and they're all over the country, which makes it a challenge for us. But we're in Washington. We're in 12 states, from Washington to upstate New York, more heavily in the West Coast than anywhere else. And we were going great guns till COVID hit. I picked a great time to go back in and be an operator, about a year before COVID hit. So it has been, I would say this is the third big wave I've been through. This sector got overbuilt in the late 90s, early O's. It seems like it's almost every 10-year cycles. Then it went in the late O's, early teens with the global financial crisis. And we came out of that so resilient and interest rates were cut, that it created a bit of a feeding frenzy, I think, by the middle of the teens. And then it would have been overbuilt in a difficult period anyway. The labor would have been difficult anyway. But COVID just added gasoline on the fire. And I know just, the mental health issues were the toughest part of that for all of us who are operators and our people, and trying to just hang together and get through it with the help of friends and colleagues, and trying to learn from each other. And I'm delighted to say we're up about now 6 months in a row. We're making steady progress. So the labor remains a challenge, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think things are certainly looking up from where they were, before we had a vaccine. I mean, just
Yeah.
those horrible days. And thank God for science and where we are now.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of any advice or tips that you could give to any person starting in long-term care, or any executive person who wants to take on this mission, as we call it, what would those tips or advice be?
I think if you're a young person looking to do this, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. That was always my goal, is to get into business and figure out how to raise money. I think a lot of operational people are intimidated by the finance world, and the finance people in turn aren't really intimidated by operations, but they don't know what they don't know because they've never worked in a community. And I think to be well-rounded, you really have to know both. And I would encourage people who come at it from sort of an MBA financial background like
Mhm.
I did to go work in a building, because I think there are some absolutely unique things about senior living that are harder and more difficult and better and worse and just different from any other sector. And until you're in a building, seeing all the moving parts, it's hard to fully grasp that. And for my operational colleagues, I just tell them, don't be so scared of this finance stuff. These people aren't, geniuses. You're as smart as anyone. The stuff you do in operations is way harder than the finance piece. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, to understand how the world works, how you look at analyzing a opportunity, how you write a business plan, how you talk to investment people is important. And just don't be scared. Ask questions, educate yourself, find a mentor, and try to see the whole picture, both operationally, sales, marketing, and finance.
I'm glad you mentioned mentor. Did you, just out of curiosity, did you have any mentors?
Well, I don't know if my old boss, Paul Steinhoff, is listening, but the guys at Greystone early on, Michael Lanahan and Paul Steinhoff were very, very successful in the investment and consulting fields. And Paul in particular, who I reported to, was just an amazing mentor to me. So I hope he's listening,
We hope
because
so.
he taught me a lot about how you double check work and how you think critically about things, and how you don't force an answer. You try to let the facts speak for themselves when you're looking at opportunity. So Paul was a great mentor to me.
Awesome. In terms, I know we talked the first time we met, we talked about employees and we talked about people and the fact that this industry is a people industry. And then we talked about, how having an employee-centric culture is really important. Um, so tell us about the culture and how you keep your staff motivated and happy and just valued.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think COVID's changed the world. I think there was a lot of things. Our people working in these communities, of course, don't have the luxury or the option of telecommuting. They have to be present to take care of these folks. But I think the larger ethos of the era we're in is to support employees. The pendulum has swung. I mean, they have all the power now, right? We have to have them show up, and they can go work anywhere. They can go work at fast food and make $18 an hour. They have to connect to the mission. And the most important thing in any business is the why. And the why of my ecotourism business is, we trick people into learning about the bush when they think they're going on an adventure. So we kind of trick them because we say, hey, you're going to come learn about the bush. Probably they won't sign up. And by the way, we have almost a perfect record on TripAdvisor. We're in the TripAdvisor Hall of Fame in that business because we've done so well with our reviews. We have over 2,000 reviews and only a handful of them are negative. So we're doing something right there. Senior living is a
Wow.
lot harder, but when you know that you want to take care of your people, decisions become easier. We had a huge increase in our benefits costs this year. And instead of passing that along to our single employees and our single employees with children, we capped it, and we grew the benefits enrollment by almost 50%. So we have almost half our employees getting benefits from us now. So they're going to be a lot more attuned and wanting to stay with us and be the so-called word engagement. They're going to be engaged employees if they're getting benefits from us. We've raised wages like everybody has 20 or 30%. We're trying to create a culture of celebration with our EDs. We just had a great meeting up in Colorado, and 12 of our executive directors won Best of in the new U.S. News and World Report survey, and we gave them trophies and took them to a nice dinner. And I think the more you do those kind of cultural things, people work so hard in this sector, and other sectors get to have more fun because it's not 24/7. Your hotel industry is renowned for partying and having fun, and people want to have colleagues. They want to connect to the why. And that's always been true. COVID has made it so much more important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is a perfect transition into kind of like the challenges post COVID and the huge staffing crisis that the industry is facing right now. I remember we talked a little bit about staffing agencies and you were telling me how you guys were working really hard to remove and kind of not have to turn to these. agencies. So I kind of want you to talk a little bit about that, and if you can give any advice or tips for executives out there, it's very well, that would be very welcome.
Well, thanks. As I said, there would have been a labor push anyway, just demographically. COVID was so hard on our caregivers that, nurses and other nursing aides and med techs have left the field just due to the challenge of it. But I think some of them are starting to come back. I do think it's getting better. But, when it first occurred, the real absolute worst of the labor crunch during COVID, I think everybody was sort of blown off the line. That's a football analogy where the offensive line gets pushed back. You're just getting killed in the trenches, and because everybody all of a sudden had this new part-time job called recruitment. And what we're seeing now is most locations can manage it, but it's made everybody have to reorient their day. And it's like I said, it'd be like, hey, Victoria, guess what? You have this new part-time job called recruiting. And that cultural piece, it takes a whole team, particularly your clinical staff, your executive director, and your business office manager, to source the resumes, review them, push them through the interview cycle, and then when you get them, to make sure they have a mentor and they are taken care of those first few weeks. Otherwise, it's just a revolving door of turnover. So it is a multifaceted problem. I do think, some markets are a lot tougher than others. So I don't want to say, that's not a fact, but with the right leadership, I think it has become A, more manageable, and B, where we're still having trouble, it's where we've had, just challenges and dysfunction in the local management team.
Yeah. So what are you doing in terms of, are you doing anything specific in terms of recruiting, or are you reaching out through social LinkedIn or a platform? What are you, in terms of trying to find new staff, what are the things that you guys are doing at Pegasus?
I think we're doing a lot of the same things a lot of other people are doing, and we're running. You run all the traps on everything you do. You have job fairs, you do Indeed, but what we're finding, the piece that I think is equally as important that I would stress, Victoria, is the orientation period with new employees. We're testing. We're just now rolling out a train at home approach, because it's kind of like if you were over a kindergarten or something, or a school teacher, or another just high stress job with a lot of people. If you're just thrown in there the first day, all of a sudden, if those first few weeks go badly, you don't want to stay. And what we find is people don't have the training because it's stressed. So what we're going to do is allow people to have the option, and really encourage them to spend the first week at home going through the training online. So they're not in, because you say, yeah, you're going to train, but you're starting. And our theory is that doesn't work very well, because they start and it's too chaotic. You want them to have a mentor, but the mentor doesn't show up. So to allow them to have a week of training at home, either their first or second week, we think is going to be helpful. Though we're hopeful on that, because otherwise you just lose a lot of people if they don't get trained right.
Of course, that's really interesting. And another particular thing that I personally think it's going to be really important, the staffing side of it, is the memory care programs that you guys are working on currently. I think that needs to be, it's a different approach in terms of staffing, because if you have a high turnover rate, it's harder to have these quality memory care programs and attend these residents how they deserve to be attended. So how are you working on that, and what are you doing to kind of alleviate that pain?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about it, everyone, the agencies, I think, are trying to be part of the solution. By the way, a lot of people are, we're so upset about agency, but it's better to have agency than not have anyone. I mean, we don't have the luxury of saying, like a restaurant, we're just closed on Mondays, or we're closing that wing. We have to have people, so that's better than having no one, because at the end of the day, we got to take care of people. The cost is a big part of the problem with agency, but the other problem is, even if they're good people, they just don't know our culture. They don't know how, quote unquote, we do things. So that problem is magnified in memory care, where people are in there and they really don't know effective strategies for redirecting agitated people who are afflicted with these horrible memory problems, mainly Alzheimer's, but other forms of dementia. So the agency is actually quite a bit more problematic in memory care than it is in assisted living. So, one thing we're trying to do is first address that in memory care. If we have a choice, make sure we have our own people who are trained working in our memory care wings. I mean, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Sandy Peterson, who's a physician and noted memory care expert, and we have the theory of neuroplasticity, where if you move, connect, and learn in that order, you can get people to rebuild neural networks and live and get actually in some levels improve. That's a bold claim, but we think at least it can slow the progression, and in some ways when they're socialized and active and doing these things in daily activities. So we're just working on the basics of making sure all our communities are doing the Connections program, which is our branded memory care program. That is a lot of effort going into that with training, which I already mentioned. I think it's even more important in memory care. I also think as an industry, we need to educate the public on the benefits of memory care more than we have done it. I think it's a scary thing, but if you are someone afflicted with memory care issues, memory disease, and you're in assisted living, it would be like me being in a French class, where I don't speak French. So they don't know they're disoriented, and it causes tremendous stress when you don't know what's going on. One of the first signs of people with dementia, I always tell families, is they go quiet. I had a friend who had his father-in-law over, and he sat and we were talking pretty rapidly, socially, and laughing, and he just looked blank and he didn't say anything. And when he left, I said to Mark, I think your father-in-law may have some issues, and it turned out he did. He had early form of Alzheimer's. So people who are trained in managing this disease and these problems are key to having an effective memory care program. We get a lot of people come in, they don't want to go into memory care, so they go into the assisted living, then they end up transferring. And I wish we could, but it's more expensive. So families are scared of it. It's more expensive. But if they need that, they're going to be happier living in the moment, doing the right kind of memory care program. That it's not a quote unquote locked unit. It can be a place that is better suited for their needs, where they're thriving and living more in the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of communicating that better to the families and the people surrounding these or these residents, how do you go about that? How do you go about changing that perception?
I think it's a matter of education and having our salespeople. Sales has sometimes a negative connotation as well, but the best salespeople are in our sector are empathetic and persistent at the same time, and they have to be well versed in what we're offering, and it comes down to training our salespeople to interact and learn what the clinical benefits of the program are, so they can more effectively communicate it to the families.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let's start kind of wrapping this episode up. Any advice for younger generations? And the way that I usually ask this question is, if you could go back in time to younger Chris about to start in long-term care, what would you tell him? Any piece of advice that would really make a difference in the way that, people that you or any other person thinking about entering long-term care are going to go about it?
It's a great question. I mean, I feel very, very fortunate the way my career evolved, that I got in it and had a mission in life from an early time. I think I've really kind of hit it earlier, Victoria, of not being scared of ops if you're finance, and not being scared of finance if you're in operations. I think finding a mentor and being active in the industry. The National Investment Center for Senior Living, and Bob Kramer, the founder there, and the events they've had, Argenum, American Senior Housing Association. I think you don't need just colleagues, you need friends. And I think along the way, getting out and being active and getting involved in the trade associations is a great way to learn, continuing your education, and just trying to find those mentors and be well-rounded, because people tend to be so specialized, they don't always they're like six blind men and the elephant. But if you can somehow figure out how to see the whole picture, it will prepare you to be a better, well-rounded executive and entrepreneur if that's your desire.
For sure. So last question that is kind of transitioning into what you said about the trades association. How do you keep yourself informed about long-term care? Do you read any blogs? Do you listen to any podcasts? Do you have any newsletters that you like? Anything like that? Do you go to conferences? Anything like that to keep yourself educated?
Yeah, I've been going to the National Investment Center for Senior Living Conference. It's coming up in DC for probably since the early 90s. Probably been at least 25 times. I was on the board of Argentum. I'm not now, but we try to stay active. Same with Asha. There's a podcast. I think it's called. They're going to shoot me, but I think it's called Bridging the Gap. Do you know that one?
No.
It's either Bridge the Gap or Bridging the Gap, and it interviews. It's similar to what you're doing here with senior living executives. I think I listen to that when I'm driving to work. A lot of people I know on there, but it's still good to hear their thoughts on their company. I like here, I'm going to look at it right here. I know I'm looking away. Hope I don't look weird. The Senior Care Investor. I'll give my buddy Steve Monroe a shameless plug. That is a great one. It's really focused more on the acquisition market and trends in the sector. The NIC data that they publish is very good, and I encourage people to read that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Great to be here. Good luck with a
Thank you.
successful year. Take care now.
You too.